If you're not familiar with my work on order followers, which is what these people are, that's why they do what they do. They don't want to think for themselves. They don't want to reason right and wrong for themselves. They want to listen to what other people tell them to do and then just do it because that's a cop-out and an easy answer, and they think that that somehow absolves them of their personal responsibility and moral culpability. I put out this a few years back called The Cult of Ultimate Evil, Order Followers and the Destruction of the Sacred Feminine, which is the true heart-based care energy within all of us, which gets murdered in these cult members so that they can go out and perform the behaviors that they perform like the automaton robots that they are. So this is another critical video for people to take in and understand the concepts in it. The police and the military are the modern equivalent of house slaves of the Civil War era period. They are the people who are keeping the system of slavery in place. And they do this through duress, which is the first part of the three parts of this presentation: duress, dissidence, and deadly force. Part of the problem in the non-recognition of the human condition of slavery is most people do not understand what the condition of duress is and why it is so immoral to conduct upon anyone. I'm going to explain what duress is. And these enforcers of slavery are continuously conducting duress upon other beings. And they have no natural right to perform duress and keep other people in a state of duress. And the people who are under this state of duress have every right to end it by whatever means they choose to end it. They have the right. Now, see, I want to make it clear today, I'm not suggesting a direct course of action to anyone. I'm just trying to explain to you what your natural rights are to do. You might be perfectly within your natural law right to take a behavior and yet still die because you take that behavior. To do the right thing is not always the safe thing to do. I'm not talking about what's safe in this presentation. I'm talking about what's our right to do, naturally and inherently in creation. Is it a right or is it not a right? That's all I care about. I'm not talking about whether negative consequences will be rained down upon me by brainwashed cult members if I perform the behavior that I have the right to perform. I'm just trying to conceptually have you understand that the right to do a specific behavior to end duress exists in nature. So let's look at what duress is. Duress is a condition, a continuous condition of coercion, of the free will of a being or group of beings by another being or group of beings through threats of violence and or actual acts of violence if those being coerced do not comply with the decrees or commands they are given. That's what duress is. It's someone saying to you, you will comply to my decrees or commands, or I threaten you with violence if you don't comply. That's the condition of duress. When people are held in the condition of duress, they are unlawfully, and I mean unlawfully not by man's law, but by natural law, prevented from exercising their free will to engage in rights which they actually possess, and or they are coerced through threats of violence to perform behaviors against their free will. Meaning if they don't do something, violence will be conducted upon them. Or if they do something that the masters tell them they must not do, violence will be conducted upon them, even if that behavior is one of their rights. That is what duress is. That's what duress always has been. That's what duress always will be. And every single individual in this room, listening on video, and in the entire world is living in the condition of duress, whether they know it or not. I am under duress. You are all under duress. Every person here is living in a state of continuous duress. And there is no one on this planet that has the right to hold anyone in the condition of duress, and every person held under the condition of duress has the right to end that condition immediately upon its beginning, by whatever means necessary to end it. That is our natural law right, our birthright. So why do people make the distinction between people who put other people in duress as common thug criminals or mafia types, robbing people directly on the street, or demanding protection money to allow them to keep operating a business? They separate those people from the people who are saying, you can't exercise this right without my approval, or if we find you doing this particular behavior that we told you can't do, we're going to come and shoot you or strangle you or do other kinds of violence unto you. Yet our society somehow is so brainwashed we make this distinction. We think that one group of people is not holding someone in duress, namely the police and the military and the government officials, and yet the common street thug or the common mafia enforcer is holding people in duress without right. Well, news flash, everyone, there's no difference between the states of duress in these images. Because if you believe certain people have rights that other people believe, you don't understand truth, you don't understand morality, and you don't understand natural law. Every one of these instances in this slide is a criminal act that the person has no right to perform as an individual. So what's the difference between a police officer and a strong-arm mafia enforcer? Nothing. There is no difference between them. They are both common criminals. They are both members of gangs, and I would amend that word to say they are both members of cults who do not question orders or think for themselves. They both initiate violence to enforce policy. Both have a code of secrecy, a lack of transparency, and both cite the institution's policies for the violence that they manifest in reality. They are ultimately responsible for their behaviors, yet they want to somehow abdicate themselves of that responsibility by saying, oh, the politicians ordered me to do it. The lawmakers ordered me to do it. It doesn't matter who tells you to do something that's wrong. If you did it, you're responsible for the harm. So, we look at mafia crime, right? And this is big in where I come from. South Philly's a mafia stronghold. Almost everybody I know knows somebody that's been involved at some point or another in mob syndicates, So let me ask you a question. They're all identified with the gang, the mafia, the mob. Does that mean that the person who's the bag man running drugs or running number tickets or, taking bets or something like that, isn't identifying with the same gang as the person who actually conducts a hit? You could argue, well, one's exercising one level of violence that's very high, and yet the other is simply on the team that's condoning that violence. They may not be performing an act like the ones at the bottom, but nonetheless, they're condoning it because they're on the same team and they're still helping the people who are doing that. You know what that's called? It's called a complicit gang member. Or, I would word it, a complicit cult member. They're just as complicit. The lower level people involved who are supporting the institution that runs their behavior are just as complicit as the murderers in that institution. It's the same thing with any institution. You could look at normal common street gangs. I mean, this is big on the West Coast with a lot of gangs. It's big in Chicago with gangs. New York, to an extent as well. Philadelphia gangs are a little bit to a lesser extent, but major U.S. cities have problems with gangs. Okay? Now, we will look at their actions and say, well, hey, what about the lower ranking gang member who is just out, selling a couple of bags of cocaine on the corner? Well, they're still identified and are a lower level member of a gang that's conducting violence. They're conducting this violence for territory. They're conducting this violence for the right to operate within the region that they're operating in. Hence why it's called a gang. They control territory that they operate in and try to keep anybody out from that territory. It doesn't matter what level of involvement they have. They're involved with a gang that is violent, and therefore they are complicit in the violence that is backed by this gang. Well, that's one thing. Yeah, exactly. The people who are actually doing organized crime, no one thinks they have a right to do this organized crime. Correct. No one would think, hey, the gang members have this right, the Mafia has this right. You wouldn't think that, yet people believe government has these rights to conduct violence upon people. So again, you look at some of these behaviors that are conducted by the cult of ultimate evil, namely the segment of that cult called the police. Look at the kind of violence they conduct, throwing a paralyzed man out of a wheelchair because he didn't stand up upon command. You know, ripping a school child out of a desk violently, almost breaking their neck by turning their chair over backwards. Pepper spraying student protesters in the face with 2 million Scoville pepper spray. Kicking a handcuffed woman in the back of the head with a round kick. That's a big man right there, boy. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what that is, a fucking coward. That's exactly what that is. Let me tell you something, folks. These are the tame examples of police brutality in this country. Tame examples. Now, you look at the desk guy with the happy smile on his face. You know, oh, and notice the stormtrooper in front of him. You know, he thinks that's one of the people he should be, modeling his behavior upon. Yeah. But what is that? What is that paper pusher in the cult of ultimate evil? He is a complicit gang member. That's what he is. Just like the bagman in the mob, just like the lower level gang member selling some cocaine on the corner. Doesn't matter what your level of complicity in the violence is. You're complicit in the violence. These people are destroyed at a soul level. They're husks. They are spiritually dead husks. You know, people will say, oh, Mark, you're dehumanizing people. No, I'm trying to tell you how spiritually destroyed a human being can become. And you know what? We have to understand, not all of them are going to be able to be reached with words. Not all of them. We may be able to reach many. That's what our job is to do. I'm saying we have to step up the effort more to reach people with reason and words and morality, an understanding of morality. But there are some who are destroyed beyond the ability to reverse their course. They're dedicated to evil, whether they even understand that their behavior is evil or not, because that's what a cult does. It makes their membership completely identified with their position in the cult. And then they just say, I'm in this far, I'm all the way in. And no one's going to convince me that I was wrong. See, this is thankfully, thank all of creation that I was able to extricate myself from when I was involved in the cult that I was involved in, namely the dark occult, Satanism. Finally, I was able to be reached with language and reason and persuasion. I also had to practically ruin my life and almost die. That's how hard-headed I was. And then I think I was that hard-headed. There are people who make me look like a light case of the ego. A light case. You know? So I'm trying to explain to people, you have to understand what we're really up against spiritually. How deadened certain people are spiritually. It's going to take Herculean, monumental efforts to try to mentally and spiritually reform these people. That's what the great work is. I'm not saying this to make you depressed about it. We have to know what the task is. We have to know it definitively, honestly, and accurately, or we're not going to get this job done. Again, these are the modern so-called house slaves. Now, what the house slaves of the American Civil War era period were, tragically what they were, as violent and immoral and completely and utterly wrong as the practice of slavery was being performed in this country, you have to understand there were people who were taken from their native lands, and because they were given a little bit more privilege, they beat and whipped and kept the other slaves in line that were often family members, parts of their tribal groups, etc. You'll look in these images, there are slaves with weapons in their hands, threatening the other slaves who are non-compliant with the master's demands. They're willing to do this to their own people for a little bit extra food or a warmer blanket, or instead of to sleep, in the elements in a field, in a crop field, to sleep in a dog house in a crop field. Literally. You see some of them with guns, holding guns while the others are in chains. I mean, this is a special kind of psychopath. This is a special kind of immoral human being. Instead of trying to do something to end the condition for all of them, they took up the side of the master. And this is what the modern police forces are, and the modern militaries are. And in every country in the world. It doesn't matter, not just this country, everywhere on earth. That's what this cult of ultimate evil actually is. They are slaves themselves conducting slavery upon other slaves. And they don't even want to be free. There's a special place in hell for the house slave. There's a special place in hell. Whether you believe in hell or not, I'm talking about there is a special place of spiritual torment that is reserved in the hearts and minds of people who do jobs like that. The order follower always bears more moral culpability than the order giver, because their excuse is, I'm just following my orders, like the Nazis said at Nuremberg. Their excuse is, well, that's the law and I don't make it, I just enforce it. I'm just doing my job. They bear more moral responsibility than the person telling them to take the action. Because the order follower is the one who performs the behavior. And in taking that action, they actually bring the resultant harm into physical manifestation in the world. Order following is the pathway to every form of evil and chaos in our world. It should never be seen as a virtue by anyone who considers themselves a moral human being. Order followers have ultimately been personally responsible and morally culpable for every form of slavery and every single totalitarian regime that has ever existed upon the face of this planet. And get as offended about that as you like, those listening out in the internet world, but nothing will make that statement untrue. Nothing will make this one untrue either. If you did it, you are ultimately responsible, not whoever told you to do it. The excuse that I was ordered to do this immoral behavior by someone else is no excuse at all and should never be accepted as an excuse by anyone with a conscience.
The American justice system worked, beating the crap out of people before judges let them go. Almost makes me want to pay taxes.